Welcome back to the video. Today I'm going to show you how to run a simple server locally on your computer on port 3000, and then I'll show you how to host it on AWS servers so it's always listening. You don't have to have it running, it will always be listening on the cloud. So here we have a really simple server. All it does is going to add two numbers. It's going to have one endpoint, and it's going to add two numbers. And it's going to return the result as a JSON. For testing, it's going to run on port 3000, and then for once we host it on AWS will assign its own port. So it works for testing and then for deployment on AWS. So we can have a new terminal. First we have to start the server. We can do npm start, which starts the server, and I'll show you how to set all this up. And then we can have one more terminal. We can make a curl call using an HTTP request, and then we're going to send in two numbers. The number 1 has 10 and the number 2 has 20. So we're sending this into the server on port 3000, which it's listening on, as you can see right here. The server is gonna do the math, and then it's gonna spit out the answer as a JSON. So as soon as we hit enter, it should say the result equals a 30, which it does. And then we can also do that using an HTTP request instead of a curl call. So if we get rid of curl and then just leave HTTP, we can see the result is still gonna be 30. So that works. This only works because the server is actively listening on port 3000. If we do Control C and turn it off, it's not listening anymore. But if we make that call, we're going to get an error because we're sending a request, but the server is not listening. So let's actually code this up kind of like from scratch so we can actually see what's going on. I'm going to go to a new folder called server. There's nothing in there. And then I'm going to make a new file called server.js. Just keep in mind, there's nothing in there. Make a new terminal. And I want to be sure I have Node installed. So we can do Node-v. If we get any numbers, that means it's installed, and that's the version. Okay. So we're gonna set up our script, our package.json, so it starts server.js whenever we run npm start. So we can do npm node package manager init. So all of this could be kind of like be just left by default, but we do want entry point to be server.js, which it is. Skip through all of this. This is fine. This will make our package.json as it did right here. Whenever we run npm start, it's going to run node server.js, which will run this file, which is what we want. So first, we're gonna be using the modules that we need. We're gonna be importing them, but in order to do that, we have to install them using npm, the Node Package Manager. So we could do npm install Express. So this will install a dependency. It's loading, which means it installed it or it's installing it. Do npm install body parser to parse JSONs. It's installed. And the npm install cores, so we can listen to API calls from different origins, and then cores. Oh, I named it twice, but I think it still did it right. Yeah, so we have cores, express, and then body parser. So that's what we need. So then we're going to initialize our express app, which is called an app, and we're going to be using body parser, which we imported the module. Body parser just to parse JSONs, incoming JSON requests, and then cores, so we can listen to different API calls from different origins. So we have that. And then we can define our endpoint. In this case, our endpoint is going to be called add. Whenever we make the HTTP request, it's going to be making a request to add. That's going to have the request. That's going to be where the numbers are located in. So whenever I sent those numbers, they were inside a request. And here we're getting the numbers from the request from the body inside of number 1 and then inside of variable number 2. Res means respond. So that's what we're going to send back. Here we're making sure the numbers are actual numbers. And here we're validating that they're actual numbers. And if they are, result will be num1 plus num2, and that response will be sent back. But if they're like non-valid inputs, we're going to send back an error code of 400. And then we could set the port that we're going to use. As I mentioned before, this is going to work for testing on local host 3000, on port 3000, and on AWS. And then we're going to start the server, and then we can log whatever port we're on. Since we have our package.json created, all the dependencies installed, whenever we run npm start, that's going to run node server.js. So we can do npm start, and now it's listening on port 3000. As just as before, if we make that curl call, we get that result. So this is kind of how we run the server like locally on our host machine. But what if we want to host it? So whenever the server is running and we send the numbers, it'll give us the result. But say we close VS Code or turn our computer off and we make the call. Here I just turned it off. And we make the call, we're going to get an error because it's not always listening. To combat that, what we could do is we could host it on AWS. We could use AWS Beanstalk, which makes deployment super easy. So first, we're going to create an environment. We'll just call add two numbers. Before we do that, we're going to have to get something ready. So we're going to have some files that we need. Let me see what that file was called. So we're going to make a new file, and the name of that's going to be, actually type in there. I think it's proc, and then file. And then it kind of changed like the little image of it. Here we're going to define the entry point. It's going to be a web server, and the entry point is going to be node server.js, which is the name of it. And if we go back to our browser, where'd it go? Here it is. So we just named it add two numbers. And then we could pretty much skip all this. This is optional. It's going to be the environment name, that's fine. It's going to be a managed platform, and we're using Node.js. And it'll kind of fill all of that for us. And we're going to upload our code. We do have to give it a version number, and then we can make it a local file. So we're going to go back to where our server.js was in their server folder. We're going to want our package.json, that file we made, which has the entry point, and then server.js. And then we're going to want to compress all that into a zip file. And here we can upload that file. First, you got to find it. It's in code, server, and the archive.zip. So we're going to upload that, and we're going to keep it free tier. This is how we host our servers on the AWS cloud. It's gonna, for me, I already have an existing role, but if you didn't, it would make one for you. So it's AWS Elastic Beanstalk Service Role. Just in case you didn't have one, it would make one for you. So that's done. You can pretty much skip everything else. Sorry, I'm a little sick. We could review it, and then we can submit. So it's actually gonna host our server in the AWS cloud. It's actually doing it. It may take a couple minutes, but I just want to talk about how valuable this is. Because knowing how to do something like this, how to host a server, you could use this for like a backend server, which could listen to like calls from like a front end like website or an application. So once this is done, it's gonna give us the URL. So we'll always have to be It will always be listening. So we don't have to do npm start and run it locally on port 3000. We can get rid of this. So we can make this call from anywhere on any computer as long as it has access to the internet. Instead of it being on localhost 3000, AWS is going to give us like a URL that we could use and make the call. So I think it's still setting it up right now. So I'm going to do it live so you could see like the whole process. It still can be reached, which is fine. So yeah, it's still setting everything up. It's fine. It might take a few minutes. But AWS Beanstalk is so nice because it literally sets up everything for you. You can literally upload your code like I did as a zip file, and it'll set up the backend. It'll set up the server for you. And then once it's done, you can get that URL. I think it's done. You get this URL, and then you replace it with localhost. So we can do port instead of port 2000. We're gonna copy it and replace it by. We're gonna copy the URL that AWS gave us, and then replace it with localhost. I put 2 slashes, but and as we can see, it gave us the result, even though the server's not running. So let's close the terminal. As we can see, normally we run our server on port 3000. Let's do that. So it's running. It's still going to work because it's going to work locally as long as we just make a new terminal. So we've made the call using the old localhost 3000. Oh, it's going to work. But we can also use the AWS server that's being hosted, like on the cloud. This makes the call to the cloud, and the cloud returns the result. So now if we stop the server, it's stopped. It's still going to work because the server is hosted on the cloud. And now let's try to make this request in the actual browser itself. We can even close VS Code just to prove that there's nothing running. And then we'll get the result back from the server hosted on AWS. And it's literally that easy to host your own server. Keep in mind, this one was simple, but I used this for our senior project, our senior capstone project, to host a backend server for a website. So I really think this is useful to know, and if this helped you in any way, please leave a like and subscribe.